Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to another episode of Pop Culture Junkies. Today I want to talk to you about Nic Cage's Action Comics #1 Heist. Let's go. All right, everyone, on this episode of Know Your Lore, I want to talk to you about the Action Comics #1 Heist. Let's start with Nicolas Cage, perhaps one of my favorite actors ever. I know he's cheesy, I know he hams it up. I also know that there's very few movies as absolutely perfect as Con Air. I will die on that hill if you want to argue it. Cyrus the Virus versus Army Ranger Cameron Poe is pretty much the height of all action cinema. All that aside, I want to talk a bit about, on this episode of Know Your Lore, about Nick's stolen copy of Action Comics #1 and where it ultimately ended up. It's a pretty amazing tale. First, some background on Mr. Cage. For those that don't know, he's a huge comic nerd just like us. He was set to star as Superman at one point in a movie directed by Tim Burton. It was going to be the story of Superman returns after he dies. It would have sucked. We're lucky it never came to light, but the documentary about that failed project is amazing. It's on streaming platforms now. It's called The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened. Check it out if you get a chance. He also starred as Ghost Rider Johnny Blaze in both Ghost Rider movies. They were corny-ass movies. I enjoyed them. They were just under mid, but watchable. He also named his second-born child Kal-El after Superman himself. That's some dedication. What you may not know is his real name is Nicholas Coppola. He's related to Francis Ford Coppola. He didn't want everyone to associate him with his famous family member, so he took the name Nic Cage in honor of Luke Cage in order to distance himself from his uncle. For those that don't know, Luke Cage is a Marvel superhero. He's had a TV series on Netflix. He's had multiple comic lines, been an Avenger. Most recently, Nic Cage starred as the superhero Big Daddy in the Kick-Ass adaptation. The guy loves superheroes. He's not someone who purchases an Action Comics #1 to be cool or to show it off. He purchases it because he loves comic books, right? He's part of this same culture. He loves these things. He's someone who remembers the days as a kid when he would throw a towel around his neck with a safety pin and run around pretending to be a superhero. Nick purchased his copy of Action Comics 1 from a man named Steven Fischler. Remember that name. Fischler is the CEO and founder at ComicConnect.com. It's an auction site for high-end collectibles. You can still go and check it out today and see the high-end stuff that they sell over there. Some pretty amazing books. Nick's copy was graded at a 9.0. This is one of the best conditions of this book that's speculated to have only 100 copies in existence. There are 75 graded copies of Action Comics #1 on the CGC census for the original printing. So 100 might be a conservative guess. I think there's probably more than 25 out there that aren't graded, but you never know. Of the 75 that are graded, the 9.0 is the highest non-restored grade on file. There's a couple 9.4 restoreds. We all know the purple label is not the blue label. So we're talking about one of the most sought after and rare books in the best condition on record. It's an amazing book to have. In 2000, Nic Cage reported his Action Comics #1 had been stolen, along with the Detective Number 27, first appearance of Batman, and some other keys from his house. LAPD Don Rychek was assigned to the case. Steven Fischler actually flew out to LA to help Cage search his massive collection. They thought maybe he had switched it out and set it somewhere and it wasn't really missing. They couldn't locate the comic anywhere on the premises. It is kind of weird that they searched the house because from what I understand, the comic was displayed in a case on the wall. And after a ton of parties and events, Cage noticed it was missing. He learned they were missing in late January. Well, up through to that point, the year prior, and up to that point, he'd had several big parties at the house, topped off by a celebration of his birthday in January. Any thieves would have had ample opportunity to get it, but how would they have accessed it? Well, Cage liked to switch his comic books out frequently, and so he kept the key that locked the cases on the wall next to the case. Anyone could have just grabbed it, opened it, and stolen the book. They had hundreds of potential suspects. So before we get to the next step in the story, let's talk about the value of this book. This particular copy was sold in 1993 by Sotheby's for $86,000 to an unnamed buyer. Fischler bought the book in 1996 for $135,000. Cage bought the book from him, along with several others, in 1997 for $150,000. In 2008, a 6.0 copy of Action Comics #1 sold for $317,000. In 2010, an 8.0 sold for an even million. 1 month later, an 8.5 sold for $1.5 million. Remember, Cage had a 9.0. He had the highest grade on record of this book. Anyway, It's the year 2000. Detective Rychek is at Cage's house and no one can find this $1 million book. The story would have ended there with no real leads because they couldn't figure out from hundreds of people who could possibly have taken this book. In 2011, it was found in a storage unit, and the story gets even wackier. Dan Dotson, auctioneer and star of Storage Wars, gets a phone call. It's a guy named Silvestri Lozano, and he has a comic book to sell. Lozano claims he found the book in an abandoned storage unit. Dotson introduces Lozano to Mark Bolello, another auctioneer from the same show, since Bolello happens to know a dealer in high-end comics. That dealer, Stephen Fischler. Remember I said remember that name. So he sends Fischler a copy of this book, and they say, hey, we got this book. We'll sell it for $1 million. What do you think? Fischler recognizes the book immediately due to some weird printing errors known only to exist on the copy that Cage had. He immediately calls Detective Rychek. From here, they set up a sting. I'm not sure why, maybe to make sure Bolello doesn't lose the comic in a boating accident or something. They meet up on April 6th at Bolello's warehouse. Rychek poses as Fischler's associate. Police officers hide outside and they wait. Rychek immediately notes Bolello to be some wheeler-dealer wannabe who acts like a big shot with his sunglasses indoors and everything else. Bolello shows them the comic. Fischler examines the book and gives Rychek a predetermined secret signal that, yep, this is the stolen book. Rychek hands Bolello his LAPD business card. Bolello immediately dies inside because he knows he's not getting $1 million for this book. Forensic experts are able to confirm that this is, yes, the same book based on all the photo evidence prior and the testimony of Stephen Fischler. But the book doesn't go back to Cage. Cage claimed it was stolen 10 years before. What happened? His insurance company paid out the money for it. So who owns the book after it's found? The insurance company. So Cage had to arrange repayment to the insurance company to get it back while it sat in police custody. Luckily, it wasn't cocaine or actual cash, so it didn't disappear from the LAPD evidence locker. In the end, less than a year after it was recovered, Cage auctions the book off on Fischler's site for a record at the time $2.1 million. The last copy that I can find of Action Comics sold in January 2022, number 1, sold for $3.2 million, and that was a 6.0. I can't even imagine what that 9.0 would go for right now in today's market. The thieves behind the heist of Nic Cage's Action Comics number 1 have never been caught. Someone should make a movie. Wouldn't be the first time Nic Cage has played himself in a film. It would be awesome. That's all I have for you this time, guys. I hope you enjoyed this content. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the flip side.